Thank you so much. I'm very grateful to Professor Hong and Yonsei University for inviting me to participate in this very important conversation at the International Forum on Liberal Education and as part of the Blue Waves lectures. A lot of my thinking developed when I was in Hong Kong a decade ago, and I'm grateful, just honored to be part of this very important conversation. So thank you so much. I will cover a lot of information, and I do apologize for that. I will try to approach it in a reasonable manner. If you have questions, though, please do wait until the second half, and I'd be happy to hear what you're thinking about. Obviously, many of the things that we're going to talk about, I'm speaking very obviously from an American perspective. I've had experience in Asia, I've had experience in Europe, but it's important to begin by acknowledging the ways in which a curriculum should always reflect the institution out of which it comes, and the needs of the students and the strengths of its faculty. And I wanted to begin by simply acknowledging that very important idea. And obviously many of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about here will need to be translated into both an Asian context and a particular national context as well. I want to begin by discussing the trends. If you look at all of the general education models in the world, and as you well know, it is increasingly a wide trend to have general education. On one side, if you place them all on a continuum, you will find the distribution model that my colleagues were speaking about moments ago. It is a very familiar model. It's oftentimes a very simplistic model, requiring 2 of courses from one area and 2 of courses from another area. On the other side, what you have are what I refer to as integrative models. And integrative models are different. They have distributional aspects to them, but the key with an integrative model is that while it introduces students to thinking and knowledge within a particular area, also important there, or perhaps even more important there, is the students, in addition to the student's understanding of the content, the student's ability to think about how that content relates to other areas. So an integrative model, what it does, the aspects of integrative models will foreground not just the content of the field or the content of the discipline, but how that content connects to content in other areas, other fields. Another way to think about it, this is General Education 1.0, the distribution model. This is General Education 2.0. So yes, we have the disciplines, but it's about how do these disciplines connect to other areas, not just within education, but beyond education, to the political world that we live in, to our family world, to our career goals, to how social media is operating. So Gen Ed 2.0, an integrative model, will foreground how areas connect and disconnect with one another, rather than simply focusing on each area. If we go back to the original graphic, what we find, and these are American statistics, and so I will not claim that they are representative of the rest of the world, is that roughly 15% of American universities have purely distributional models. Roughly 18% of American universities have models that are completely integrative or largely integrative, and roughly 64% are in the middle somewhere, blending the 2 kinds of models. What's more, we know that the movement is away from distributional models towards more integrative models. Part of that, of course, is because of some of the problems that were being discussed earlier in this conversation. But there are 4 other reasons that I'm going to point to as a means of explaining why these trends are occurring, or at least why they are occurring in the United States. The first one is what is referred to as wicked problems, and I want to be sure that I'm clear about what I mean by a wicked problem. A wicked problem is a dynamic problem. It's a problem that is shifting. What the problem looks like in January and what the problem looks like in October might be very different. A wicked problem is one that does not have a simple solution. Wicked problems oftentimes occur in fields like engineering or city planning. And what works in one setting might not work in a different setting. The data for wicked problems is often incomplete, complicated, or contradictory. It's difficult to make sense out of the data, out of the input of the information that we have. Sometimes there are very different ideas about how to solve these problems. Sometimes there are very different ideas about what is causing these problems. And sometimes there are very different ideas about whether or not these problems even exist. Wicked problems themselves are oftentimes difficult to recognize. They might be happening and you might not know that they're happening. And then finally, and this is, I think, where wicked problems relate to general education, the problems themselves draw from multiple areas. They're not simplistic problems that a single field can solve on their own. Some examples of wicked problems would be climate change, immigration, poverty, COVID, and education. COVID is perhaps one of the most powerful examples of wicked problems that we can put out there. When the pandemic first began, we weren't sure necessarily how to combat it. As our understanding has evolved, we've had different practices in different areas, so there isn't a clear sense of what's going on. Sometimes politics has gotten in the way of solving the problem. Sometimes economics has gotten in the way of solving the problem. Sometimes communication has gotten in the way of solving the problem. And I will point as well to education as a wicked problem. And I know that this is very counterintuitive for many of us because we are all educators and we care deeply about education and see it as a solution. But education itself, if it were simple to do, we would probably not be having this conversation right now. Our understanding of what effective education is evolves as the world evolves, and as our understanding of how students learn evolves as well. Part of the reason in a wicked context that integrative education is important is wicked problems are problems that require students to, where students are forced to deal with problems they haven't seen before. And so they must be adaptive. They must be able to take information from one area and apply it to a new area, or apply information or practices that they've had that have been productive before in completely different contexts. The second argument I would make for why integrative approaches to general education are becoming more prevalent. This is an image from the Education University of Hong Kong. The caption for this image was "My teacher." As you can see, of course, the image is it is a tree, and it's made up of all the elements of what it is to be a teacher. I think this is an excellent metaphor for the work that our students oftentimes have to do. They have to take these fragments and these pieces of their lives, the fields they are studying, the relationship with their family, the personal experiences, the political context in which they live, all the information that they're encountering on social media and in regular traditional media, how the arts think about the world, how science thinks about the world. And they've got to take all these pieces and all these experiences, and they have to put them together into some image, some meaningful whole that works for who they are and the role that they want to play in the world. So an integrative approach to general education, it not only exposes students to information from different fields, it is explicit in creating time for students to put together all those pieces, contradicting messages, different ideas and ways of thinking about the world, different values. So having time to put these pieces together into a meaningful sense of purpose, of who they are, of where they want to go, and what they want to do with their lives, of the role that they play within the community. The third idea is very simple. Oftentimes when we think about learning, and forgive me, I am not a neuroscientist, but I have worked with these ideas a great deal. Oftentimes when we think about how information works in the brain, and we think about courses as being isolated from one another, there's the idea that I have a piece of information and the brain creates a neuronal network for it. If that piece of information, say within a biology class or a literature class, stays isolated from other information, it's harder to access, it's harder to recall, not just 4 weeks after the class has ended, but certainly 4 years after the class has ended. So part of the goal of an integrative approach to liberal education or general education is to show how all the information that we learn is connected to other information in order to make that information more accessible. Because what we know is that if one neuronal network with a piece of information that a student has gained in an art history class or in a politics class is connected to information from their prior lives, from their personal lives, from their political lives, from other classes that they've had, from their major, if those connections are made more explicit, then it's easier to access the information and use the information at the moments in a student's lives where that information is called upon. Again, the rationale, part of the rationale behind an integrative approach is rather than presenting information in isolation, it's presenting it in a web of knowledge, a web of meaning, in order to aid recall. The last idea simply has to do with citizenship. Finally, regardless of the career path that a student takes, whether they're studying medicine or law or education or social work or business, we want to make sure that they encounter not just the knowledge within that field, but the implications of how that knowledge operates in the world around them. So regardless of the path they're taking, where do they learn ethics? Where do they learn what is right from wrong? An integrative approach foregrounds that. It doesn't simply say, here is your major, and it is isolated from your general education courses. It's asking students to think about how the two interact with each other. Where do students learn information literacy? Where ideas are coming from, the degree to which those ideas are true or accurate or not, the degree to which those ideas are perhaps being inappropriately or amplified by social media, or perhaps dimmed and silenced by social media. If they do not have information literacy, how are they capable to sort of interact and respond to the world in a productive way if they've been misguided? Regardless of career path, where do students explore viewpoints that are different from their own? Because it's a complicated world that we live in. There's a lot of contradiction. There's a lot of disagreement. And finally, to be productive citizens, we need to be able to listen to one another and to sift through those ideas and to communicate our own ideas to other people. And then regardless of career path, where do students explore empathy and humility? The ability to pay attention not just to their own needs and their own interests, but the needs and the interests of the people around them in a realistic way. Again, an integrative approach, rather than saying, here's your field, it is all you need to know, it says, here's your field, it is very important. How does it connect to these other ideas? How do these ideas come into play? We recognize now, as the world becomes more complicated, that to be an engineer without ethics is very problematic. To be a doctor without empathy is very problematic. To be a social worker who doesn't have humility is very problematic. Perhaps to be a politician who doesn't have ethics or humility is very problematic as well. So those are the 4 reasons that I point to for why there has been a movement towards integrative education and general education. I will point out that I've only covered 4 here in my various books. I've covered several different ideas, some of which are covered here and some are not. Paul Gaston, who studies this as well, has 7 ideas. So there are a lot of different ideas. These are the 4 that I wanted to put on the table in the limited time that I have at the moment. The third area I want to cover is our integrative courses. So just simply giving some examples of how we can design courses that are integrative. In order to do this, I want to begin by making one very important point. Oftentimes, people use the term integrative and interdisciplinarity interchangeably. I would like to make a distinction between the two. I would like to make the point that an interdisciplinary course is generally an idea where you take 2 topics that are very different and you put them together. So politics and art is a good example of this. You could teach a course very easily on politics and art because the 2 obviously interact with each other, but most professors in politics aren't going to have a background in art, and most professors in art aren't going to have a background or the sense of their own expertise in politics enough to do this. Some will, but many will not. An integrative course, on the other hand, is taking aspects that are already interdisciplinary within the field and simply foregrounding them. So a physicist will understand the dynamics of how sound and music operates, both on the physical creation of it, but also in terms of how the waves of sound work and how they interact with the physical space around them. That is not foreign to the work that most physicists will feel comfortable with. This, for me, is a very important distinction, because if we talk about interdisciplinary courses and we're working with faculty who are very proud of the expertise they have in their field, and they feel like we're asking them to move beyond their field, that can be very intimidating and it can be very off-putting. If, on the other hand, what we're saying is, no, it is not about you learning an entirely different field. It's about you thinking about the way your field already connects to the rest of the world, and simply bringing that into the conversation at a greater level. For instance, when I teach literature, I must always teach history. I must always teach politics and social movements and gender dynamics. All of those things come into play very naturally for me. So integrative approaches allow faculty and professors and instructors to work with their expertise. It does not require them to move beyond that. There are a lot of different ways to move integrative courses, or to create integrative courses. So thinking, for instance, some examples of an integrative course within mathematics, it would be relatively easy for a mathematics professor, most mathematics professors, to connect to logic and systems, because mathematics is based upon logic and systems, or computer science, or politics, because we think about things like statistics and polling, sociology, as well as working with data. Chemistry uses mathematics very naturally. Art is oftentimes built both in terms of sound and visual art with mathematical aspects working in it already. Similarly, as I mentioned, literature always depends upon history, has sociology in it, psychology, religion, philosophy, and environmental science. To varying degrees, all of these things already exist there. So the goal is not to ask a professor to change what they know and where their expertise is, but to simply work with that in different ways that are beneficial to the students, because rather than the students seeing each field as isolated, they can start to see over the course of time with an integrative general education the web of connection between various fields. Another way to do this is to take, there are relatively artificial ways. So perhaps a professor comes in and they have some background and they could apply a theme to a course they can bring into play. So literature and social class, perhaps a person has a particular interest in politics and brings that into the literature classroom. So this is another way of thinking about it that's less integrative and more interdisciplinary, but it builds upon the expertise of particular faculty. So I've got a colleague named Carrie Finch-Smith, who is a mathematician, and she is interested in code breaking, which is a mathematical field. So she brings that into play in her mathematics classes. Sociology and travel, because it's a topic. Travel oftentimes is a topic that's not covered in academic settings necessarily, but it is related to intrinsically sociology. And then courses like the psychology of social media. So a phenomenon that we're experiencing in the world where the field that we're studying, by applying that field into this context, we can make sense out of it and show the relevance of it to our students. It's also possible, of course, to think about something like a community-based course or a service-based course, where students are studying a particular topic in the classroom, but then they're working in the world outside of the academic walls. So you could have students who are studying mathematics, teaching mathematics, or tutoring mathematics to primary students, helping them with it. We could have students who are studying gender dynamics in a history class, gathering oral history from the community around them as a means of taking the ideas of the classroom and applying them to the broader world. We could have students who are studying politics look at how politics intersects with healthcare, or students who are working with healthcare look at how politics influences healthcare practices. This is a big issue in the United States. And then situations like, can we take our study of nutrition in the field of chemistry and think about how this interacts with developing nations or even developing regions within our own countries? So all of these are integrative approaches, and they ask us to engage the world around us in varying degrees, in varying ways. As we're talking about this and thinking about courses, I will also point out that one powerful way to design an integrative course is to think about courses that are both team taught and team designed. And I want to offer 4 models of this. I think when we talk about team taught courses, generally speaking, people will think about having 2 or more instructors in the room at the same time. That's a very reasonable approach that can happen. It does require a lot of resources. Worth noting, though, is we can have something like this, where you have classes out on Monday. Maybe you've got 5 classes that are combined. They're all together in a large lecture. And on Wednesday, they break into 5 small groups working with various professors. So no additional resources are necessary, but maybe your 5 professors are from different fields. And so whatever topic is your course is working with, the students are exposed to different fields and how they approach these topics. You might also have something where you've got a topic like, for instance, poverty, where on one day you've got a nutritionist in the room, another day you have an ethicist in the room, the next week you have a political professor in the room, another day you have an economic professor in the room. So different professors walk through the room, engage the students, bringing different perspectives into play. And then finally, just worth noting, a course can be designed by faculty from different fields, but they don't have to teach it together in order for it to be integrative or impactful. Now, if I could, I'd like to spend a few moments thinking about integrative assignments. Part of the point I think I'm trying to make here is that whatever model we're working with, at the institutional level, and I'll discuss that in just a moment, at the institutional level, it can be a highly integrative model. But if the work that the students are being asked to do is exactly the same as the work that they would be doing in a distributional model, it's not going to be impactful. So finally, for an integrative model to work, we have to ask the students to work with these materials in integrative, synthetic ways where they're putting ideas together. So here's a strange example of an integrative assignment. Students who are studying literature are asked to explain to the Department of Business why literature should be included in a business course. This is a completely hypothetical situation. My assumption is that finally business departments probably will not include poetry, as much as I would like them to do that in their curriculum. But what I'm basically asking the students to do in this setting is explain why what we're doing in this course matters to other fields. And we can switch this around. We could ask students in a business field to talk to the English or the literature department. I'm sorry, we call English departments literature department. I really mean the literature department here. Why a literature department should include a business course. Notable here, though I'm asking students in this example to explain why literature should work for business, there is no correct answer. It's really about how carefully the students are processing the information and applying the information and making sense out of contradictory ideas. And that's one of the things that integrative education does. Please note that they are still doing the careful work of literary studies. They are still analyzing literature very carefully. Here, they are still thinking about management and business models and corporate needs, etc. We might ask students in any class to simply write a paper that asks this. We are in a biology class. What might what you study in your major, how might that help us think about biology? You're studying psychology, we're doing biology. What does psychology bring to the field of biology? You're studying philosophy, we're doing psychology. What does philosophy bring to the field of psychology? You're doing art history, and we are studying political science. What does political science bring to, or sorry, what does art history bring? And then you can flip it around. What did you learn in this course that can be applied to your major? So building into the course moments where students are moving from this course to other courses, this field to other courses. Finally, it's a very interesting thing and sometimes a little scary to say to students somewhere in the course, what did you learn in this course that matters and why? And can you connect that to 3 articles that we've read, or 3 political theories that we've discussed, or 3 mathematical concepts that we brought into play? What matters here? How does what you're experiencing in this moment connect to the world around you? Remember the tree image that I showed you. This is a moment for students to make sense out of the experiences that they're having, to connect what they're learning in this course to the world around them. If we don't give them time to do this, oftentimes they'll move on to the next course, and within a matter of weeks, what they've learned in our course might be forgotten. Another interesting example, an art course with community murals, that is large artworks in the community, asking students to think about the community around them and to design an art mural painting for that community, thinking about the goals of that art. What role should this art play within the community? How do we get input from the members of the community about the kind of art they would like to have or the needs that they have? And how does mathematics come into play here? And what's intriguing for me about this model is that this kind of project where you're gathering community input, where you're thinking and working within a budget, where you're planning and getting feedback on those planning, that's what actually happens in the field of art. So we want to bring the complexity of the work that occurs in the world outside of the academy into the academy, rather than separating all the pieces. An example from Hong Kong, we ask students to assume the role. They've studied marine biology, so we ask them to assume the role of the marine biologist working within a conversation in Hong Kong about land reclamation in Victoria Harbor. So that is sort of reclaiming the land and building more, creating more space for more buildings. So they are talking then about their field, but they're talking about their field with business owners, with real estate developers, with politicians. So take the content in this course and explicitly connect it to other areas, other fields, with real world problems. The last point that I would like to make is simply about the overall structures of integrative general education. In the same way that we want students to do integrative work in a class, we want to develop structures where that integration becomes possible. So here's an interesting example that we refer to as the strands or the themes model. You can see on the left-hand side of your screen that we still have the various distribution aspects. Students are required to take classes in the social sciences, in the natural sciences, in the arts and humanities. What makes this model different is that rather than simply being courses within those fields, those courses connect to larger themes or strands, thematic strands, that are of value to the campus. So we could ask them to explore nature and technology. We could ask them to explore a purposeful life. We could ask them to explore globalization. We could ask them to explore well-being or ethics or climate change. Whatever questions, whatever ideas, the university in conversation with faculty, in conversation with students, decides is important and valuable to us. So students will be taking a class in the social sciences, they'll be learning about social science methods, but in the context of conversations about climate change. And then they might go to an arts or humanities class also exploring climate change. So they see how the social sciences thinks about it, they see how the arts and humanities thinks about it. So there's an integrative approach because they have comparison of the same topic, but from different disciplinary perspectives. It's worth noting that the themes chosen at the top here should really reflect the values of the institution. And it's also worth noting that periodically the institution should come together and rediscuss those themes. Are these topics that we are exploring as a campus still the most important topics in our world? The world we live in 2022 is very different than the world of 2012 and even more different than the world of 2002. So we need to be sure that the curriculum that we're working with matches the world and the interests of our students and the gifts of our faculty, the talents of our faculty. Another model, this comes out of Castleton State University in Vermont. Again, it's very simple in terms of distributional aspects. You can see that there are writing courses, aesthetics courses, lab science courses, social science courses. What makes this model integrative is that there are 3 courses built into the curriculum that all students must take. One is a first-year seminar that has an e-portfolio that is highly reflective. So in that first-year seminar, they're being introduced to the skills necessary to succeed in an academic setting, but they're also reflecting on the various courses that they're taking. They have that moment to put ideas together thoughtfully, deliberatively, carefully, and discuss how those ideas connect with other people. And this happens again in the second year or the third year. They meet again, and they do that same thing. You've now had more courses, you're further along in your studies. How would you make these connections? And then they have a culminating course, the last year of university, where they meet again to have these conversations. It's a very simple model, except for this kind of, it's almost like a spine or a backbone running through it that brings everything together, gives students an opportunity to make things more meaningful. Another way to think about distribution is what we've referred to as distributive competencies. Here's how this works. A traditional model says, here are social science courses, take some of those. Here are STEM and science courses, take some of those. Here are arts and humanities courses, take some of those. A competencies-based approach simply says, here are 4 things or 6 things or 5 things or 3 things that we want you to be able to do. 3 competencies we want you to have when you graduate. The ability to solve problems, global competencies, social justice, analysis, and interpretation. Again, these will be very different moving from institution to institution. Distribution occurs, but in an integrative way. So you may find social science classes popping up in social justice competencies, or analysis and interpretation competencies, or writing competencies. You may find STEM classes popping up in critical and creative thinking and in global competencies. You may have arts and humanities popping up in all of these different fields. So the idea here is that rather than the curriculum being driven by the disciplines, it's being driven by what are the skills we want students to have when they graduate from university, and what are the various places that they can meet those. And the recognition that problem solving, it occurs in STEM fields, it occurs in social science fields, it occurs in arts and humanities fields, and that different fields approach it in different ways. And please don't take offense if your field is not connected here with a competency that it operates. I'm simply illustrating here, so my apologies. Another model from Wagner College on Staten Island in New York. All students in their first year are asked to participate in a learning community. These learning communities consist of 3 courses in 3 different disciplines dealing with the same issue. So for instance, we could have a first-year seminar in English, or literature rather, looking at the role of technology. And then you could have a psychology class looking at technology, social media, and the brain. And then you could have a politics class looking at how we regulate technology. And the learning community means that the same group of students will take all 3 classes at the same time. So they're constantly connecting what's happening in one course studied in one field with another course studied in another field. Students have these learning communities their first year, they have these learning communities their 4th year or their last year, and they have one other learning community that they have to take at one other point. This is an integrative model because it's looking at the same topic from different perspectives, different fields. These learning communities also have experiential components. Wagner College is on Staten Island, right outside of New York City. So the students go into the city and use the city as a laboratory through which to explore the various ideas that they're encountering in their classes. Distribution exists, but it is not the thing that drives the curriculum. The thing that drives the curriculum are these 3 learning communities that students participate in. Worcester Polytechnic in Worcester, Massachusetts. In the second year of Students University, they spend an entire semester working on a single project. They work in very small teams. The projects address real-world problems that are interdisciplinary, that draw from multiple fields. The students work in interdisciplinary teams. They work with a single professor to address this real-world problem, and it is all that they do that semester. No other course occurs. This project counts for everything and all the credits that they're going to need. They do this again the last year of their university education, focusing just on the major. So what are the real world problems? And let's give our students time to work on those, drawing from all the different fields that they've studied and all the different ways to approach this, and having time to really engage that problem. Groningen University in the Netherlands has something very similar. Every year at the university college, not the entire university, just the small liberal arts college in the university, every year students will deal with one project. They will have one course where they work collaboratively to address a single project. Perhaps it is refugees or immigration. Perhaps it is sustainability of neighborhoods. Perhaps it is brain injuries. Perhaps it is something fanciful like sustainability and civil society on Mars. They're exploring this problem. They have one problem every year. Over the course of the 3 years, the problems become more difficult. And over the course of the 3 years, they become increasingly independent. They're expected to do more and more by themselves. So again, it's this idea of the complex world and bringing it into the classroom to demonstrate that the different boxes that we fit our educational system into, the ways that we separate our educational system don't really apply in much of the world or much of the life in the world. So I will point out that these last couple of models, they do draw from the work of a gentleman named George Koo. His work on high impact practices in 2009 and 2018. These are very much looking at the American context, and I apologize for that. But what he basically discovered is that the students who, when they graduate from university, who are very good at critical thinking, at problem solving, at collaborating, at working with people with different from different backgrounds. Oftentimes, the ones who are best at that are students who have encountered these 11 experiences repeatedly. So his argument is that the more they encounter these experiences, the more they come away with the kinds of skills that we want them to have. And as you think about things like global experiences, so study abroad or internships or students engaging in real research, all that complexity, all that messiness, all that the randomness of life after the university, all of that comes into play in these educational